Pastor Gamble, let's talk about the issue of liberal versus conservative. I think that an awful lot of people who call themselves conservatives are not conservative at all because they're not holding to the teachings of Jesus. In other words, they are working so hard for doctrinal purity while 450 other denominations are working on the same thing, and they're all separated from each other because of theological points. They obviously missed the big message of Jesus, which is you go out there and you mix it up in society instead of spending all your time trying to stay clean. How are they going to reach a community when they're busy trying to stay intellectually pure, even though they think it's staying spiritually pure?
You know, I think this isn't just a conservative issue. I think liberals, conservatives, maybe moderates, whatever label or camp we fall into, there are things that are going to try to pull us off the main thing. That's the history of the church, getting on task, getting distracted. It was Israel's journey, being faithful, forgetting what they were about. It's just like we seem to have collective amnesia, and that's why prophets come along. That's why God intervenes through circumstance or tragedy or difficulty or blessing. And so in our day and age, America has been cursed or blessed with this divide since the 30s and 40s, when we had a big brouhaha and denominations really maybe had a little more hold on people. Branding was real key. I'm not saying that those things are unimportant, but I think in our generation they're not nearly as important for a lot of people like they are for folks in the church. But what I have observed after 24 years of really going out in the community and joining arms with liberals to build a house at Habitat to help stuff a food pantry, to help people in a prison, where the cause are so much bigger than any one of us that we just didn't have time to sign a theological pact before we could help. And in fact, what I have learned, and I take no credit, I don't even remember exactly how I learned it. I might have even learned this from the human service people, and that is to focus on outcomes. When we begin to focus on outcomes, that delivers us from needing to prove, convert, find some summit theological agreement so we can go do good. What I have found is, listen, okay, you're liberal, you're in a different family. Let me just respect you for who you are and what you believe. You have a certain integrity about it. I try to have it with me. But we both care about these guys coming out of prison who really have a hard time finding jobs and housing. Can we just work on that? Whatever motivates you, I'm going to assume it's from the love of Jesus and some godly thing in your side of the aisle, and my side. And since we're not here to resolve that. I love you, you respect me, let's focus on that. And that's an outcome approach. Now for me, this got me out of a quandary because I was raised in a camp, very conservative, where I thought if we didn't do it, it wasn't getting done right. And what my experience led me to believe is none of us can do it all. There are liberals out there doing wonderful stuff that conservatives haven't lifted a hand to, and vice versa. And there are people who are not particularly religious at all. They just sort of generally they love God and they don't even know what they believe theologically, but they want to do good. And so I found it very limiting to think conservative, liberal became very narrow, limiting descriptions of what I find out in the community, because many people don't know what they are, if they're either or the other. They even find it hard for them to be purely one or the other. They're a complexion, an aggregate of conservative theology, liberal social policy, moderate fiscal, so it's hard to be purist in any of those things. And what I find is they're a blessed distraction from the outcome. And I think that's the whole point, is that there are people who maybe thrive or are mistakenly driving, obfuscating issues to get us off task. That's sort of my view, and my desire is to not get off the task in spite of differences. And I hearken back to something I learned in graduate school from John Wesley. John Wesley lived in a great time of revival, and he worked with people from very different theological camps. And he created a concentric circle approach. When he evangelized people personally and discipled them, he had a very tight kind of agreement. When he went out and did larger evangelical work together, he loosened that circle up. When he went out to social action, like to help the coal miners and do things that were broad social issues, he joined with others. So I think Wesley has demonstrated for us, and probably no doubt other divines along the way, that there's a way for us to keep our doctrinal integrity, even purity if that be the case, and still be engaged in mission with people of similar heart even if we have different theology, and we don't make our difference in theology a reason not to focus on the mission. And I think it's a trick of the enemy to get us to think that way, and it works, because it will be we're not giving food to that food pantry, that's run by those liberals, or we can't possibly help those conservatives, they're just Bible thumpers. And those stereotypes are so old, I'm not even sure how they apply nowadays. And what I find when I go out in the community, I've had friends that are Catholic and Jewish. I even know some Muslim folks, and I'm not likely to convert them. I'm open to it if they come and tell me that they're not likely going to convert me. And so this idea that if I go out among other faiths or different varieties of my faith, I'm going to get polluted is an old idea. I think if we are seeking after Jesus and studying His Word, He will give us what we need. And we can go out with confidence about how we're trying to be a disciple, and respect that God's doing the Lutherans that way and the Catholics that way. And I know that this makes a lot of purists, especially pastors, upset, because you're really about your theological identity. And believe me, I can quote you my theological identity. It's just that I don't find it all that essential to find partners to go out and serve with. And especially at the lay level where people are being a good Baptist or Lutheran or whatever, and they're just focused on the outcome, they don't understand why some of us step back and find reasons not to work together. And I realize I'll lose some brothers at this point. It's okay. If you need to stay doctrinally pure, then do all you can in your doctrinal purity. But my belief is that's a false choice, that I either have to stay pure or not do it, or if I do it, I'll somehow become tarnished. I think that's a trap to keep us immobilized and to infect other people with the same kind of thinking.
You know, the doctrine that you're talking about is the stuff that's more that we would just call, intellectual systematizing of theological thinking. But in case after case that I've watched in my life, and I've watched it thousands of times, the fact is these are about systematized thinking. Jesus demonstrated action. It's not lazy thinking, but it's really a very cowardly thing. And this is what I see a lot. A lot of pastors and others and seminary students try to fall in line with expectations of people they admire, people who are calling them to some kind of a purity that separates. And there's so much separation involved. And then you don't have to implement the teachings of Christ that have to do with people, because you're looking around you're always sorting people out on the basis of their thinking. Do they think like you think? And that's just a lot easier to do than to get in there, become part of society, get to know people, not just so you can try to find a strategic moment when you can supposedly
persuade them to come over to the right side.
Yeah, over to the right side.
One of the joys I've had by being engaged in some of the works I've been on task groups sometimes for 4 or 5 years at a time, every month, and maybe a sub-team. I'm on the leadership team once a month, and then we have the larger group meeting, then we have some annual events, we go do projects together. So I've spent hours with some of these people, and what I've discovered is kinship in Christ, even to the point where we could admire things about each other's movement. There's sort of an assumption that we're both God seekers, we both love God, we've come out of the tradition that we were raised in or chose or whatever. And in doing this project together, we've seen, I guess I would call it, Christ in each other. And that has just given us a level of integrity in our friendship without needing to reconvert everything in our thinking in our past. It's like people know each other's church address. I'm trying to lead people to Christ. I have a way of doing it at my church. We have lots of theological position papers, but we don't promote them from the pulpit. That's to give the intelligentsia of our church healthy boundaries and an understanding of who we are. But what informs us is the simple teachings of Jesus that we do preach and do try to model. And I think that we should focus more on that without denying the theological positions that we have. I just think we've made those an impossible level of unity before we do action.
Just think of all the denominations that have split up over these little things, that they decide is one more thing that we have to insist on, these distinctives. And so now we've got thousands of denominations with all these distinctives that they're so proud of, and they don't bring anybody closer to Christ. They don't make anybody more godly, and they certainly don't get anybody more involved in the mission that Christ gave us as an example.
Well, I think also in our day and age, denominational purism, if I can call it that, is losing steam in a big way. Most denominations are shrinking and dying. There's an independent church movement. I'm not even sure that the Christian church movement is keeping the same percentage of society as we've had in the past. In other words, we're not holding our own. Our own children aren't staying in our movement. So while we're adding some people, we're losing maybe as many as we add or more. You have to go to other people who study that sort of thing. But there's enough concern out there. And we have more people coming in from different faiths, and that dilutes the percentage that we have of the larger total. So there's ways of dicing and slicing that. But I guess my point is, in this generation, like in previous generations before we had all these identities and splits, the actions of the early disciple carried the day. Even their enemy says, these people live better than us. That's what the Romans concluded. These Christians, look at them. You can't outlive them. If we could get back to that focus, whether it's whatever your theological tradition, if it will just lead you to that kind of passionate living for Jesus and caring and respecting others. I mean, here we go to a lot of effort to respect the non-Christian we're trying to reach, and yet show total acrimony toward a Christian who's like a cousin. It's like somehow we got to get that straight. And I think the next generation is totally indifferent. In fact, will not tolerate this kind of separatist thinking that some of us inherited from the 50s and 60s. I think it's a spent force, and if people are still trapped in it, my encouragement would be is find the real basis of theological purity and integrity and ditch these limitations we put on ourselves to actually obeying Jesus, and God will help you sort that out. I'm not for anything goes and whatever you believe is okay. I'm certainly not that. I have real strong convictions, as you well know. I just don't make the conviction I have formed in a discipleship context a requirement for other people to experience before I can join my hand with them and go do good. And doing good is pretty straightforward. Hungry people need fed. Homeless people need a roof over their head. People who are ill need medicine. People who can't read need to be taught. You just go to some of the basic stuff we should be doing. Unemployed people need to find work. We can get focused on the outcome, and it's amazing how often theology is not even a point other than our love for our fellow man. The golden rule, if we can agree on the golden rule, and almost every Christian can, that gets us a long way down the road to impacting our society. Just live and join the golden rule. And I think, I don't know how big the problem is. I haven't made it my cause to study that, but I find it that people can fairly easily make excuses not to go do the work, and they will often fall back into these choices. And I'd like to encourage pastors especially to not be trapped in some of those things that we've inherited, and take a hard look with Jesus and see if you can't ditch some of that. Stay true to your theological integrity, but go out and do the simple good things with your neighbors, because the bigger issues that we have, no one church, no one denomination, no 4 or 5 denominations are going to join together in collaboration and solve it. It's going to have to be a broad-based of Christians rising up and living out their faith to change some of these things at every level of society. We have a big job to do. So these little fights and arguments, it's like, it's like trying to drain the ocean with a teacup. It's just the wrong approach. We need to see the big issue and get focused on the right side of that battle. It's a rare sight for Raleigh. Ice onto your van. Got it way up in here. How about that? Hope it'll fall off soon.